Hi, this is Paul, and for the last number of weeks, I've been recording the question and answer sessions that we've been doing on the Bridges of Meaning Discord channel. Um, I have now thoroughly bored the group, and they have no more questions to ask. And so Cassidy came up with an alternative plan for doing something with this time. And so today we are going to try it. And so Cassidy has been on my channel a number of times. And so, Cassidy, why don't you explain your idea? Actually, it was Topher's idea.
Yeah, I was
And
gonna.
go ahead and let
Yeah,
us know how today's going to flow.
I was gonna say it was initially Topher's idea, and then a couple of us banded together to make it a thing. But basically, the idea we're calling it randomizing randos, and it was this way to create long form conversations between Bridges of Meaning community members and you, Paul. And we tried to figure out a way that would be really fair. So the idea was we would announce topics of conversation, let people submit to participate, and then we would put all of those names in a randomizer. And then we could announce those names, and those were the people who would be able to participate. And there's some ideas of working on how we can incorporate that into the broader community as well. But we wanted to start with one of your Q&As just to kind of test out the idea and see how it works. Um, like we were talking before we started recording, we had this list of 23 people who had submitted, and only a couple actually showed up to participate. And some couldn't be there the whole time. So what we've decided is to include the people who have submitted their names, who are here and can be here the whole time. And then I'm going to join the conversation myself. And we're going to have a long form conversation on a topic. And then anyone who's listening in live can submit questions into the randomizing Q&A text. And we can enter those to discuss, so you can be a part. I think today, since it is a smaller group, we're going to try to see if we can allow people to, say, hey, I have a question, and like your Q&As, use their own voice to ask the question and be a little bit a part of the conversation. But we want to try to see how this long form conversation goes on this medium, and give people, more of a chance to have those conversations who haven't been able to talk to you. Although most of us have been able to talk to you who are on today. But anyway, so I'll announce who's going to be here talking with us today. So it's going to be Andrew L., KG Guy, myself, and Paul. Andrew and KG, do you guys want to introduce yourselves briefly?
Uh, sure. I'm Andrew. I've been here on this Discord for a little while, and I'm just excited to have this discussion and through this idea that Topher brought up. So I don't have much else to have an introduction.
No,
You can find
that's
out.
good. Just enough so they can hear your voice and attach a name to it.
Sure.
KG Guy?
Yeah, sure. I've been on here since like the beginning of the year, and I'm on for creative reasons, to kind of meet other people who write and stuff like that, and um, to pick the brains of other creatives who are going through similar stuff. So it's been very enlightening, and I've got a lot of help out of it.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great. So today's selected topic is social media and its effects on open dialogue. This was sort of initially kind of submitted by Valerie, and she had submitted a couple different topics, broad topics, and I kind of took a couple of those topics together and made the question. And I found it really interesting because I think right now social media is really affecting the way that we talk about what's going on around us, and people are using it more heavily than they ever have with the lockdowns, and it definitely has trade-offs when it comes to how we talk about issues. And I thought it would be really interesting to talk about on this platform because Discord is a type of social media. And I found that a lot of what happens on this Discord does encourage open dialogue, but I haven't found the same pattern in other forms of social media. And I don't know, I think it's interesting what makes this different. We obviously sometimes have our infighting on the Discord and our spats, but I do think there is like an openness that I haven't found in other corners of the internet. So I don't know, that's why I found it sort of interesting.
When you say open dialogue, can you expand that a little bit more?
Yeah. So I think I've been, for the past couple of years, been really interested in sort of the IDW and this little corner on YouTube that has really valued in the open marketplace of ideas and discussing hard topics and not really walking this PC narrative that lives in a lot of culture. And I work in entertainment, so it's very prevalent. And I see that kind of behavior of trying to shut down and not talk about things very prevalent on things like Facebook or Instagram, where it's very, very short. You know, when you have 140 characters to talk about something, it creates a lot of division. But I come on this Discord and I jump into a voice channel and people are talking about hard topics, whether it's politics, theology, religion, philosophy, in very nuanced ways. And I sometimes feel like social media has created a death of nuance, which is so sad for a very long-winded, nuanced thinker.
I think that's a really good observation.
Yeah, I guess that's what I kind of mean about open dialogue. But I'd be interested to hear how you guys are seeing it, and especially since. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, it's also indicative of participation. When you guys were talking before we started recording, that like you said, 23 people had signed on, and only a few of them are here.
Right.
I think that's I think that's understandable, because it's like I've been talking to a lot of people on here, and a lot of them wouldn't be on a video with Paul because they're extremely private. So, like, I was talking to Ginger Bill the other day, and he said, "Oh yeah, I would be fine. I don't think I would turn my camera on," or something like that, and so it kind of makes sense that people who probably don't have a more of a presence would opt in but not participate. I think that.
Kevin, can you turn your mic down a little bit? I think you've got a pretty good mic there. I don't know if you've got control on it, but just turn it down a little bit, just for the sake of the recording. Yeah. Keep going.
See if I can.
Trying to actually make a recording out of stuff like this on the Discord has its own challenges, even for a guy whose channel is dramatically poor in terms of quality.
How about if I stay this far away? I can't find the.
Yeah, that's a little bit better.
That's better.
Yeah. So I think, Andrew, did you have something to say to that?
I was like, some of my observations that I've noticed, I'm going to specifically harp on Discord itself as a medium. There's, like, when I've gone on different servers, it's the atmosphere is different, and it becomes much more like I have planted myself back into almost a more normal social media, and I remind myself, oh yeah, Discord is actually technically you would easily categorize it into social media, and which is strange because for a while I just when I was on here, I just didn't recognize it as a social media.
Right.
So
Well,
sometimes I ended up spending too much time on here, like, oh gosh.
It's very different because you can actually interact.
Yeah.
yeah, the voice, I think, is a huge game changer where you're just sitting and having voice conversations with people. And I like to consider myself an aspiring digital minimalist, where I try to make my social media consumption and like my participation on those platforms as small as possible, because I actually don't think it's the best for the human brain.
Yeah.
But I do find healthy participation in this Discord to an extent. I think there's times where it has gotten unhealthy for me and I've had to take breaks, but it's very different. And I always say, if I didn't work in entertainment, I would have no social media at all. It's the only reason I have it. But if I did get rid of everything, I would keep Discord. And for some reason, it's social media, but I don't see it that way, and I don't know why.
Yeah. I only keep Facebook around for my for my volunteer ambulance squad that I'm on, so
Right.
that's just like the medium that they communicate on. So I'm like, fine, I'll submit to this, but I dislike Facebook and Instagram because, especially with what I was going to say about like recent times, it's like a lot of virtue signaling is what I've picked up. And I'm just like, oh gosh, like I'd rather talk to you for about 20 minutes or so about some of these crazy times that we've been going through, whatever topic. I mean, there's tons of crazy things that are going on that we could talk about. But I'd rather do that for 20 minutes than see someone, write something that just...
Epistle.
Yeah, it's like... Oh, I'm trying to remember the phrase that I came up with, but...
Is it are you saying the back and forth on text is almost more draining than just sitting for 20 minutes hearing someone talk?
Well, more so like I'm talking about broad social media like Facebook, Instagram, not on Discord.
Okay.
And how that can just be like, because I was on this this like my town Facebook was just like went into some really weird stuff, and I was like, oh gosh, because they're all very. It seems like they're all very smart people, but I think the tolerance for having long conversations is just not there.
Do you think that is fueled by social media culture, or do you think that was always sort of in our human psyche?
We've always had a bit of tribalism to us, but I think the kind of claustrophobic medium of something like Facebook and especially Twitter, which is even more claustrophobic because you have so many little messages going off at the same time. So you have to be as loud as possible to even be seen, and so it becomes a shouting match just to enter the conversation.
Right.
Yeah, it's the structure of the medium is what I was sort of thinking of. I mean, with Facebook, you'll just get like a 20-page rant, and then in Twitter, you'll just get someone who's trying to shout as loud as they can in however many characters,
Right.
Speaking towards the healthiness of like something like Discord, when I joined a few months back, I was not very productive, and I felt like I I feel like the more I had participated with folks on here, the more I actually got done off Discord.
Right.
There was something about it, like where you hear something like Twitter or Facebook or especially YouTube, people say, well, I logged on and then I saw the cute cat video and the next thing I knew it was midnight. I didn't get anything done that day. It's like, yeah, that makes sense. But you get onto Discord and you have a good conversation, then you leave. You're like, man, I feel better.
Right. There's this like inspiration cycle where and I find now my YouTube spirals end up being more productive than not, because I'm just, watch lectures and stuff, but you go away and like you have you're not just watching things that aren't important, I guess. We're talking about important things, and we're dealing through issues, and we're challenging our assumptions. And so you go away feeling like you have to do something with this new thing that's going on in your brain.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, Paul, I'd be interested in hearing some of your perspective, because you're on YouTube and you have this channel, and I know you're not trying to get famous, but you have a lot of people who do similar things to you, talking about, big ideas, who are looking for this clickbait culture and trying to be outrageous to get views. And like, how does that feel to be a part of that world?
Well, I've just been listening to, the three of you talk about this and taking some notes along the way, and finding, social media, its impact on open dialogue. And there was, I think, in the formation of the question, that there was, to pick up on Sevilla King's, we should really get Sevilla in this Discord server, to pick up on Sevilla King's focus on quality and value, because and then listening to Andrew and Kevin and Cassidy, to listen to all of you sort of dissect a bit. Okay, I go on Facebook, and why do I hate it so much? So there's virtue signaling going on. Okay, well, there's plenty of virtue signaling going on our Discord server in some ways. And then there's the question of length, because Andrew mentioned, you get a sermon. I mean, sermon is kind of long virtue signal. I mean, it's as a preacher, it's the most, it's the most cringy thing we can think about. And so is it length? Because, so we talked about nuance here, and also Andrew talked about the fact that he goes to other Discord servers, and this is a social media. So we have developed here on the Bridges of Meaning Discord server a degree of culture. And I found that very much to be true, because Twitter, for example, can be a real cesspool. Twitter can be a dogfight. Twitter can be, a Hobbesian nightmare of constant warfare. But depending on how you sort of tailor your feed, I remember I was talking with someone about ThinkSpot, which is Jordan Peterson's basically a social media platform to try to rival YouTube. And the big deal on ThinkSpot was going to be, we're going to have no other rule but, you can say anything that's legal. Oh, okay. So then part of my, when sort of the Patreon thing sort of was falling apart, and I didn't know what to do with my Patreon account because I had one of those, and then people start going to ThinkStar or Subscribestar, and then there was the thing, well, there's, some pornographers on Subscribestar, and then it's like, well, boy. And then I was looking at ThinkSpot and thinking, what if, pornographers decide to go on ThinkSpot to try to go there, because that's free speech. And then someone said, well, there's pornography on Twitter. And I thought, I've never seen any porn on Twitter. And so I talked to Joey, and Joey said he had the same realization, and so he did a few clicks and says, "Oh yeah, there's porn on Twitter." Oh, no. Sorry, Joey. But I, for me, Twitter wasn't such a bad experience. Now it's gotten worse because, to one degree or another, I've waded into some of these conversations, which we could, I think about as open dialogue. People are at least speaking themselves. But and I would love to give up my Facebook account, except that, family and friends. But Facebook has, I guess what I'm trying to get at is, I don't think we have even articulated exactly what it is about social media that we are instinctively finding unhealthy, distasteful. Now, there's certain elements of it, kind of the addictive quality to it, but I think that article, that Internet of Beefs, really got at that in a way, because there is this dynamic of mooks and knights, and in a sense, social media, sort of like reality TV, has created a context in which we, in a rather disgusting way, feed off of unhealthy drama, in the way that Housewives of New Jersey, or how many, it doesn't seem to be it doesn't seem to be coincidental that social media arose at the same time as reality TV.
Yeah.
So I'd like us to go a little bit deeper into this question of, okay, so we go onto social media and we're watching this and we're even participating in it, but gosh, you get, there's sometimes that I turn off Twitter and I think, I gotta put limits on me and this platform, because it's corrupting my soul in a way that, and soul corruption isn't even just, gosh, I just blew 2 hours there, but I blew 2 hours there and I feel like I need to take a shower and find a good Christian to confess my sins to, because this is making me, this is sending me in the wrong direction from what my faith aspires me to move towards. So I'd like us to dig in. I mean, so we all can sort of beef about the Internet of Beefs, but I'd like us to dig a little bit deeper into, well, what really is going on here, and sort of in a Vervaekean sense, what is, and I haven't mastered all his fancy Vervaeke words yet, but what is the, what is the reciprocal narrowing that is going on in social media that we both find addictive and soul crushing?
Right. Well, it's interesting you bring up reality TV, because I am not a fan of the medium of reality TV, but I am so fascinated by the way that it represents people and rewires our brains to see culture. Mm-hmm. And I was talking to my roommates about this yesterday, because they're big Bachelor fans, and so I've sat and I've watched certain things, and I dissect these things that are going on in this Bachelor world, and how they've cut this together to make someone look like a villain, and they've cut this together to make it look like a hero. And so you have a lot of people, especially young women, taking this in and watching The Bachelor, and it's rewiring their narrative of what it is to find love and yes, to be in a healthy relationship. And that's very dangerous, especially if you're not thinking about that intentionally. Now, I'm not an advocate censorship necessarily, so it's not like we should get rid of The Bachelor, but I do think that there is something to be said of like how we need to talk about the way that we consume media, especially media that is more light. Like my roommates are also really interested in the makeup YouTube scene. You know, these influencers doing makeup and stuff. And you know, they always joke that anytime I'm like, how's the makeup world? They're just like, shut up, you don't care. I'm like, I don't, but I do find that world fascinating, and I think a lot of what that world is fueled by is the drama that exists in that world. And you know, Shane Dawson is a big influencer in that world, and right now he's going through a sort of cancel culture thing, because when YouTube started, he was this gross out shock humor guy who's then pivoted to be this makeup guru. And now all of this kind of what was always inappropriate, but now people are really saying inappropriate stuff, is coming out. And so it's like, how is that? How do we now move forward and like live in this world where reality TV and social media has created these versions of people as heroes and villains, but people are much more complicated and they're grayscales. But now we have to make decisions where our alliance lies, and it really matters what you do that on Twitter, because it could ruin your career.
Yeah, it could ruin you. The thing you bring up there with editing, I think that's why a lot of long form stuff has gotten really popular, because it's completely unedited. Like, you might take off the front and the back, you know, from conversation or something like that, just random stuff. But outside of the intro and the outro, everything in there is what you see.
Yeah.
And so somebody can lie to you. You can tell because it doesn't match up with the rest of the conversation. And whereas in editing, you can cut a scene to where it sounds like that lie lines up with the rest of the conversation.
Right. And I do think that is a big reason long form is getting popular. But what I have noticed, and I don't know if this exists in all, you know, cultures, but the cultures that I'm in, especially entertainment, most people don't go and look for the long form. They see the clip and go, oh my gosh, it's so clear. Can't you see it? And it's like, wait, hold on. What's the context? And sometimes to say, wait, what's the context? Like, that question's not even tolerable. It's like, the fact that you would even ask that shows that the evil that lies within you, and it's scary.
And you're questioning me?
Yeah. I've always been asking that question recently, the context question.
And I don't think it exists. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
You can go.
I was just saying, I don't think it exists everywhere, and I do think that eventually that culture is going to break, because people are going to have this, like a similar thing that I did when I started becoming very interested in the IDW of like, oh, maybe I don't know as much as I think I do. Like, everybody has those moments, and it's going to break, but how do we encourage nuance on social media platforms where it's hard to cultivate?
Yeah, and
I think you get that here.
To an extent. I mean, one of the things that I was thinking when you were especially talking about the reality TV, I was thinking about, well, a lot of it's just, and I've been thinking about this, is like, we just tend to think in narratives, and we just relate to the world in that sense. And then that's also, I think, the problem with social media is that the narrative is so short, and we don't really get the full story from someone, and sort of, in a sense, also the context from which they're expressing a certain view onto the world. And so then you have the easy placement of people into camps that are facing each other, that are spewing stuff at each other and throwing like grenades into each other's camps, like, you suck. It's just like this bipolarity of the nature of the social media, but it's always in different contexts, or like different different systems, basically, of how they operate.
Yeah.
I think I want to highlight about Discord. There is a negative side. Like, I don't want to paint it like some perfect platform or something.
Yeah.
I've seen people, like, because in the general chat, there's been some debates recently between our resident former Orthodox Jew and a Southern Baptist. And they've just been going back and forth, and sometimes it gets kind of heated, and people ask them to move to the forum, because that's kind of where you can have nice open debate. But I don't think it can get heated, but I don't think it's ever really gotten to the point where people are outright insulting each other. They'll catch each other and say, like, hey, that's going a bit too far, but then usually you'll hear them apologize. And I think that's different, though, because I've heard folks say, don't apologize to the mob. It's like, yeah, that's a mob, but these guys are literally apologizing directly back to each other. That's different.
That's
very different.
The thing is that, in a sense, because most people on here, we sort of fall into different camps, but we all sort of realize that we have different takes on our camps, in a sense. So I wouldn't even really call it a camp. We mostly see each other as individuals. But there's still been times when people have gone too far, and sometimes apologies haven't been made. So it's not always the ideal, but sometimes, and that's just human nature in a sense. But I guess the ratio of interactions where things have been inflammatory is pretty, to like just normal interactions, are pretty low compared to like social media, where the percentage is pretty high.
The ratio of forgiveness, though, is a lot higher. Like, you probably will not be forgiven on any other platform.
Oh yeah.
Well, and that gets back to the question of culture here. That there is a culture that has developed here where, part of this obviously has to do with the high level of religious participants in this forum. So, I'll sometimes go over, I haven't done it for a while, but I'll go over and lurk in some other forums like the Portal, Discord, and ask questions, because I'm curious about that. And so, obviously that there's culture that's developed here. There have been people who have, flamed out and slammed the door. The 2 or 3 people, to my knowledge, have been banned because culture, even culture does have to have a certain degree of enforcement. My preference is to give people a lot of rope, and generally speaking, if you give them a lot of rope, they'll usually, do something, do something self-destructive with it. But usually in a social media platform, that's something they can come back from. And there are a few people in Bridges of Meaning Discord that have left and come back several times. And in many cases, they've got their own demons they're working through. But I do think, I look at social media and reality TV in some ways sort of as junk food, because, we've all got this, one of the things that I've learned a lot from Peterson and Vervaeke is a lot about cognitive science, in terms of the fact that here the world is so enormously large. How do we handle this complexity? We handle it via narratives. Stories are unbelievably powerful compression algorithms that take huge amounts of reality and compress it down into manageable ways for us to deal with. And we as human beings develop very early on in life this capacity to use narratives. We see ourselves as narratives. That's how we manage the complexity of our lives. We see the culture around us as a narrative. That's how we manage the enormous complexity of communities of tens, dozens, thousands, millions of people through these narratives. And so now we go out into the world and we want to engage with the world productively. Well, now we get into this Jordan Peterson chaos order realm where we need just enough, this bicameral brain thing, where we need just enough chaos to keep us interested, but we don't too much chaos. We sort of lose the thread and have to go back into a dark place and suck our thumb and regroup, and you see this same process happening with social media, where we go out into social media because there's a degree of chaos there. There's the chaos of other human beings, and we want to go out and gather information. Cassidy, before we started recording, talked about herself as a sort of an addict of information, and so she goes out, and we go out into social media partly because of this along the way we have figured out watching movies and television shows that are highly edited and highly scripted. We like it because the narratives are clean and well developed, and some of the smartest, best people have gone into making this production for us. So we really enjoy that. But now with social media, now with reality TV, in a sense, we have the sense of, ooh, this is less scripted. Now, in the case of reality TV, the bullshitting, we have sort of gotten accustomed to the bullshitting and seen, okay, so an editor and a producer, and they've spun this into a narrative, and we're not really seeing the people in all of their glorious nuance, complexity, chaos, the good and the bad. We're seeing a character that this editor has created out of the volumes of reality TV footage, constructed it into a narrative. And of course they have done that, and I think Cassidy is right in that they do this because this grabs a larger audience. But then there are these spelunkers like you all who, no, I really want to get down into the roots of the mountain here, and I really want to dig down. And okay, so now social media is, in a sense, a great platform for that. But the platforms themselves and the algorithms, in many ways, have now taken on the roles of the editors of reality TV. They are constructing the narratives. Twitter is showing me the feeds that Twitter is guessing based on what I've looked at so far, what I want. YouTube, Cassidy asked me about YouTube. One of the very interesting things that I continue to learn is just watching YouTube and how it works. So I'll see a video from a small channel that suddenly gets hundreds of thousands of views. Okay, what's in the title? What's in the thumbnail? Why did YouTube prioritize that? I look at, I listen to Benjamin Boyce and Jonathan Peugeot talk about not exactly shadow banning on YouTube, but you know that the algorithm is monkeying with it, and Jonathan and Benjamin suspecting that YouTube is suppressing their channels. That's okay. Well, that's interesting. So in a sense, we go out into social media imagining we are going out into the street. Well, what is the street? Now, your street is also the product of, generations of editing, intentional editing on the part of politicians and police officers and neighbors. And so, none of this is without human fingerprints. But so now we go out into social media, and it's just sort of like, sitting in my office. I have to keep snacks out of my office, because if I have snacks here, I will just sit here in front of my, doing my work and consume a bag of chocolate or a bag of chips or something. And after I do it, it's like, that was a dumb idea. And that's very much the same sense I get out of too much social media. So I don't know. Again, listening to you all, these are some of the the threads that seem to be emerging.
The going back into the cave and sucking your thumb, that's what you get from eating the junk food of social media.
Yes.
Yes. You eat that, it's like eating a whole pie of pizza. You're like, oh my gosh, I feel so bad.
Yes, yes.
Or like having a cart of ice cream, you're just like, oh. But yeah, and I think the nice thing that I've gotten out of this Discord for sure is that everyone seems like generally across the board, I've found that people are, when we've actually compared, the big five, people are very high in openness. And so it's always been nice because everyone's, in a sense, always has their flashlight on in the dark and trying to find, and they have like a big flashlight, so it's like really bright, and they're all just looking for something, and it's just like they're all just scurrying around in the mines or whatever, and like reading books, like what can I get out of this, stuff like that. The canary
on Paul's point on walking out into the street, like the way that I look at social media is you're walking into somebody else's book, but it's a book that everybody has access to, and they're all writing in it, and it's completely incomprehensible. So the story that's being kind of constructed, the analogy that I use when it comes to this stuff is I talked to Andrea with the Bangs, and we had talked about what happened to George Lucas's story. Why did it kind of go off the rails with the prequels? And I said, well, the original trilogy had a good editor. That was his wife. Well, he divorced his wife. Like, if he had never done that, we probably would have had a great whole, like the entire series would have been great. But you've got the vision of a single man, then you've got the people underneath them, and something like this Discord, the vision of a single man is Paul, and so we're all kind of in the same vein because we kind of understand our perspective of what Paul thinks, and that keeps us in a frame of mind, especially when we're interacting with each other here. But you go out onto Facebook, and it's like, okay, what is the perspective of Mark Zuckerberg? Nobody knows. The guy's a weird blank slate, and all of the people under him are corporate, and so they're all just spouting corporate taglines. Then you go under that, and then you've just got media. You go under that, and you've got rich people, and you go under that. It's like it's spreading out, and you've got this giant pyramid of people disseminating an idea that they don't understand. And it's like, it's no wonder why there's no overarching story to Facebook.
Yeah, I think when you mentioned the pyramid, it made me think of sort of this analogy that I've been thinking of is like story mapping and mapping, and this is what I've liked about what Paul does, and why I've listened to a bunch of, actually, especially his older conversations with people, is being able to just lay out how you've thought about things and sort of mapping it to each other and showing, okay, here was this mountain range where I was having this great time and things just collapsed and I went into like this awful ravine, and sort of, and then also not projecting, that is a loaded word, but expressing sort of a compass in a way that you use to get out of maybe the ravine. And that's sort of how I've been thinking about stories recently, is like, how could that, and I feel like the open way that Paul talks to people is how we could maybe do that.
I mean,
There's an infectious openness to it.
Yeah, because it's just, there's no real bars being held, and you can just sort of, and I also, if you want a reference for this, towards the end of my, I talked with Kalepa towards my last video with him. I talked pretty extensively. I'm not giving the best account of this idea, but we all need to be able to willingly share our stories and our maps, and then we can, and our compass as well, and we can get a solid landscape. It's basically it's the reverse of, because I've read about 40 pages of Sam Harris's moral landscape. It's the reverse of that. He projects the landscape from one perspective in a way, or where he's just sitting and he's not walking around the mountain range. But this is, we in a sense are all out there, but we have like a collective meeting point, which is like this, maybe it's, in a sense, it's also this Discord, because we all meet here and we express our stories. And,
City on a hill.
Yeah. And so we all are here, and then we go out, in this sense, into our own realm and come back and be like, oh, this is what I learned, you know? This is a little chunk of my story.
But yeah, it's interesting you bring up the moral landscape, because I remember, I think it was William Lane Craig or something, talking about the idea of what's the best for human suffering. It's like, that's a subjective question, the same way, like, if you were asking what's the best way to get to this certain destination. Well, it depends on what you're looking at. Are you looking for the scenic view? Are you looking for the quickest way to get there? Because those are two different things. And that's where, sometimes when we get caught in our own narratives, it's like, the best for what? And like, I will say, as far as some of what the PC culture and what social media does is give voiceless people voices, which is good because there's power in our stories. I think the problem becomes when we make our personal stories this ultimate truth, and then we just keep seeing it through that lens without opening up to the nuance. And you know, I think one thing that this social media platform does well is integrating the voice, because when you're talking about communications over text, we have no idea of inflection. So we can look at these heated conversations we're seeing between these two people with varying beliefs, and sometimes you can look at them and go, oh my gosh, these people hate each other. But it's, in some ways, it's like the same cultural communication if someone who came from a very reserved Catholic family went into a very loud, argumentative Italian family and been like, man, they hate each other. But that's just how they communicate. That's their cultural communication, and they understand that. And so we take our own little narratives, we plop ourselves in the middle of someone else's, and use our lens to understand what's going on. And social media, it's hard not to do that with social media. But it's so much more nuanced. And because we have voice channels, we can sit and go, oh, we hear those two people talking civilly other times, and then they get really heated, but that's just, they're on the same operating level. They know what they're doing. Maybe it's not as hateful as we think, but you know, sometimes there's trolls, sometimes there's hate, but you know, it's part of being human.
You get to the point where you can't say anything because you're spending too much time apologizing, and so you just have to say what you have to say instead of typing the whole thing, or else you're going to get, you know, Vakian apologetics of, I don't want you to feel, you know, intimidated by this or anything like that. It's just like, no. It's like, okay, just get past the apology and get to the point.
Yeah, and I think this was hinted, or I think Cassidy talked about this a little bit prior, was sort of the healthiness of the Discord, and also just comparing it to other places. I've gotten really a lot of benefit from just being able to sometimes just sit here and talk to people when I've been like like in the sense my nature is to just isolate myself, but sometimes I find for some reason this media easy to just talk to people. I think it might also have to again do with the openness aspect of this area of the internet.
Well, and I think Paul did make a point about, and Joey has said this too, I've had conversation with him, there is a lot of Christians on this server. And when we look at who Jesus was and his sort of ethos, there is a lot of like forgiving your brother and helping, and like being there for others and creating community. And I always think about what is my role as a Christian when it comes to hard conversations. And I always end up in the place where it's like, I need to be the person who is not easily offended and doesn't go out of their way to offend people.
Right.
And that's a hard line to balance. And, I think sometimes even when there is a lot of tension and heat, and we're all humans, we all fail. There are a lot of people who are willing to apologize and move forward. And there's so many times where there's so many people who want to come together and like love. And it doesn't matter what your background is. Like, we want you to feel like you can come and talk about the things. It doesn't always have to be these like deep intellectual questions. There's people who've come with their burdens and we've been able to help each other, and that's really awesome. And I wonder if there wasn't so many religious people on there, would we be able to keep that going? I don't know.
It depends. I think it depends on the culture. I think you raise a good point. But I mean, in a sense also with the burdens, those can almost be like those are usually probably the deepest conversations in a way, even if you're comparing like the deepest philosophical questions or conversations, you can get into, if you like start talking about your burdens, it's almost like, in a sense, it's almost like a Pandora's box. Sometimes it's almost like our microcosms of, maybe you could say chaos, I don't know, but
yeah. But it's funny because I was listening to Sean McDowell talk to John Steingard, the guy from Hawk Nelson who left the Christian faith, and they were talking about how atheists don't really have strong community groups like churches do, and people have tried, but they haven't lasted, and why that is. And I wonder, is there something to because we have people of all different denominations and different religions on here. Is there something to this commitment to religion that does make this more sustainable? And if we try to get rid of that, is it going to crumble?
I've been working through the Sermon on the Mount in my Sunday sermons and going through it again this time. So much in that sermon is about creating a culture of interpersonal relationships. And I think so much of what Jesus does is, if you take these values and you raise them up as high as Jesus does, these will help you form a healthy community. When Andrew, when you were talking about, how much time you spend here, and also talking about how it's fun to come to the Discord and get some new information, get a new book recommendation, get a new video to watch. That's all cool. But it's the bonds of love and community that make a community durable. I see that in churches. It's this is the place where your heart was broken and people came around you. This is the place where you had a need and people sacrificed to help you out. And it's those kinds of interchanges and interactions that build a strong bond. I remember a number of years ago, camping came into United States culture in the 60s. That could be a whole nother conversation. But one of the things that sociologists noted was that families who camped together had a greater sense of community. And I think part of that was the chaos and unpredictability of nature. If you camped out on the East Coast, you spend a lot of time camping in the rain, which I did growing up. You do that as a family, and that suffering and that together in suffering bonds you. And so many of the teachings of Jesus are, like I'm preaching this week on Judge Not That Ye Be Not Judged, so many of these teachings call for sacrifice for one another for the welfare of the community. And if a community really does practice this, and if even only 20% of the community practices it in a serious way, the community will form. And as I've been watching this Discord form, one of the amazing things that I've seen is how often these church qualities have happened in this context, even in this social media format. So I think when it comes to atheist communities, it's not that atheist communities can't form, but you're not going to get the elevation of these values. I think those values are within atheist communities because they're within our culture generally, but you're not going to get the prioritizing and the repetition of these values in a determined way where, just to sort of, hack us as human beings, where in this community you are going to lose status for being a jerk. Because that's not just the normal losing status in a community for being a jerk, because communities have a certain degree of resilience to jerks if the community is getting other things from those jerks. But this is a community where Jesus is king. And so you're at least going to have to show some of the values and quality of Jesus if you want status in that community. And here at the front of this building is a cross with a tortured man on it, and that sets a tone that I think is productive for the creation and maintenance of a community, often where lonely and hurting people can gather.
Yeah, that's like in a sense, the total benefit and blessing of Christianity is that there is a ease of forgiveness and lightening of the burden, in a sense, because you can just be like, well, we all are fallen creatures in a sense, but we need to be able to recognize that in each other as well. Mm-hmm. Or else that's, I think, part of the mob culture in a sense with social media is they find a victim in the other camp, and they're like, all right, get that guy.
Yep, pile on.
They just hop across the trench that's dividing them and, stab them or whatever, just go at them. And the other camp can't really do anything because, in a sense, it's almost like they're in this other section where they can't help,
Well, and to get back to the earlier comment about open dialogue, well, once you have this gang warfare culture take over, you do lose nuance because I forget this quote I picked up from the relationship between nuance and tyranny. I mean, you lose nuance, you're going to have tyranny because it's not just the threat of violence, verbal or at least verbal assault against members of the rival or opposing tribe. You keep your tribe together by the threat of violence with breaking rank because you're ready to do damage against that other army of mooks on the other side of the divide, but you're really going to save your fiercest judgment towards the traitors in your own midst. And once that type of culture digs in, and I think social media, especially with the algorithmic purifying effects that the commercial platforms have adopted, once that culture takes hold, well, you've basically set up a tyrannical system. And now not only do we see the life of the university played in the streets these days, not only is every place evergreen, not every place actually, but certain, not only is Seattle and Portland and areas of other blue state cities evergreen, but now social media is gang warfare because you don't dare say, do all Black lives matter or only the ones who are killed by white cops? You don't dare say that.
Right.
Because your group is going to enforce that because that's the value of this group. Now, when it comes to Jesus, here we have a guy who everyone wants to kill. And in fact, he's been turned over by one of his 12. And so right there at the midst of the church, ideally, you have a capacity not only for thick community that we deeply need and desire, but also for a community, hopefully, where we can get into nuance, which is anti-tyrannical.
With the betrayal part, it's almost like we've reached the bottom of hell if we're talking Dante's Inferno with betrayal.
Yep, that's exactly right.
Well, I was watching a TED Talk by John Ronson, and he talks about social media and social media shaming. And one of his big points is we've now created a license to do really uncompassionate things in the name of compassion. And that's what I do think social media has really created, because there is this wall where when you're not face to face to a person, you're much more willing to say worse things than you would ever say to someone to their face.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
And when it's in the name of standing up for the rights of lives lost unjustly, or for discrimination against an outside group, it's really hard to rein that in, and it becomes this status. If you can tear down someone else in the name of niceness, it doesn't make sense. It's a contradiction.
It's easier to virtue signal too, just for that reason.
Well,
Right.
and then virtue signaling becomes a status play.
Yeah.
And that sets up all the wrong dynamics again, which again, right at the center of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount are 3 lessons in anti-virtue signaling, right there at the middle. When you do your forms of righteousness, do them where nobody sees.
Yeah.
It's right there in the Sermon on the Mount.
And it's disturbing as well that so many of these people do that, and yet they're doing it as a form of status seeking. And the people that actually get status doing such things already have status to begin with.
Yep.
It's like I'm going to get famous by being famous, and then get more famous. It's like, and yet the everybody beneath them is trying to do the same thing and can't do it. And it just became, it's like a capitalism of virtue signaling.
Yeah. Oh,
And suddenly they get resentful of each other and themselves because they're seeing the same thing that they don't like in capitalism in virtue signaling, and they can't fight it because it's their tribe.
Yeah, they start kicking each other down the pyramid as they're trying to climb up. When someone starts getting close to me, oh, I'm going to kick you down. You're not going to get to the top. I'm going to beat you.
I'm going to be more woke.
Yeah.
And it's
I'm going to beat you.
And it's that antithesis which will, of course, absolutely destroy community and set up this internet of beefs and set up this gang warfare, this Serengeti, law of the jungle, and and we hate that because we hate it and we love it.
Yeah, I think you've brought it up before of what was it called? Blood sports.
Yeah.
I was around for the beginning of that, and it was interesting. I thought it was a good way of getting some open dialogue out there, but doing it kind of in a more of an entertainment way. But it quickly turned into rivalries and shouting matches, and it became unhealthy very fast. And you could see the folks that got into it and the folks that realized what was going on and got out of it. Sargon of Akkad was involved with it very early on, and there's another guy called I can't remember his name, but one of the guys that really got into it went a little bit too far and was talking to a friend of his, and he's in Canada, and he was talking about his friend waving around a gun or something like that. It just got stupid, and he dropped off the map because he got into legal trouble, and it's because he wanted to be more and more outrageous. And there's a spiral that people get into when it comes to rage and anger, and Tim Pool has been bringing it up recently. It's like these people don't want solutions; they want to be angry. There's a comic that it's like, hey, like, man, I can't stand this thing. Well, here's the solution to your problem, and he smacks down whatever the guy's holding, and he says, I don't want a solution. I want to be angry.
Right.
That doesn't help anything.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
when you brought up the spiral, it made me think of, in a sense, we have it's like the opposite of a spiral in a way, where we're circling outwards, but we keep on getting farther and farther from what maybe you could call, I guess what, in a sense, this Discord aims for is some sort of truth, whatever you want to claim that to be, or however you want to define that. But it's like, and you also get this phenomenon of disillusion because you're getting so farther and farther away from each other, and it becomes this separation. And that's sort of part of another dimension of social media, is that it's the paradox of we're much more connected, but we're also so much more disconnected because we just see the face of someone.
I think clarity would be a lot more accurate, because truth is so...
Yeah, clarity is a good one. Yeah.
But if something is a little bit more clear, people can gather together more.
Yeah, or just like a general telos. There's no telos anymore. It's just a...
Yeah.
I don't know exactly how to describe the outside of the spiral, but the inverse spiral. And it's also makes me think of Peugeot and his
Yep.
talk inversion.
Yep. You get to a certain point, and it comes back around. The clown.
Yeah.
The clown is now the sane one because everyone else is being the clown. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and I think there's some truth to say that there is some sort of unity around division or outrage, like those. And I don't think it's a healthy type of unity, but there's, and it's marketable, right? There's a reason Milo Yiannopoulos did what he did, because it got him views. And there's a market for the outrageous. And I think there's a lot of people who argue that's why Trump sometimes talks the way that he talks, because if he's PC and like every other politician, he's not going to get as much news coverage as if he says outrageous things and doesn't censor himself. And I don't think that's healthy. But how do we get outside of that unity? Because there is, I think, so many people, and you're seeing it, I think, especially in conservatives, because they've been told for so long that they're, or people feel that they've been told so long that they're evil for holding these conservative beliefs, and they don't care about people. And it's just frustrating. And then finally you get people like Candice Owens, who will scream and say, you can't tell me whatever, and does all these things. And I think for a lot of conservatives, they can hear some of these things that these sort of loud, screaming conservatives say and go, okay, I can agree with some of the underlying issues, but I don't agree with the way you're doing it. But they do it that way because that's what gets them the views. And so it's a real negative feedback loop that we as individual humans are feeding into, because there's something in us, something really dark and disgusting, that loves the drama and the outrage.
There's something more effective about speaking out in strength. The way that Candice Owens does, like you don't gauge a whole lot of weakness for her communication style. But there's the fast acting thing is shock value of, wow, she just said that. And that will jar a few people either towards her or away from her. And then you've got a very slow, methodical, long-suffering of the folks in early Roman time, the Christians in early Roman times that had no status. There's something more long-lasting about that seeps into people. Where Paul had brought it up before, of the there's more of a story about the servant or slave that held her own, and then her master.
I think it's so platform. When we think about the question, this kind of became sort of a conservative fever point about structural racism. Let's look at structure with respect to these dynamics. So a social media platform understands that in terms of our salience hierarchy, someone getting angry grabs our attention. Now, why would that be? Because if you're in a room and someone gets really angry, you have to pay attention to them, because anger is sort of a is sort of an early indicator of potential violence. So our bodies are now tuned so that if someone in the room gets really angry and they start shouting outrageously, we look at them. Okay? So now you have a platform, and the goal of that platform is a commercial platform, and the coin of that platform is attention. And so what you do is you tune that platform to attract the attention of as many people as possible. So, okay, so now what we're doing is outrage is the coin, because outrage and anger go together, and we are naturally disposed to look at that which is violent, that which is angry, because that's how we're tuned in normal society to look around. And just like the church is tuned by the values of Jesus, of judge not that you be not judged, turn the other cheek, don't do your righteousness in public. These are all the value tunings of Jesus that he intends to dominate the community. Now what we have in social media platforms are this other tuning by our amygdalas and by our limbic systems to draw our attention to, all of the usual suspects that grab our attention, because in a normal, in a community of a few dozen human beings, we have to pay attention to these signals. But you up those signals. Now, what happens when this is being done to a large population, especially a bunch of younger people? That tuning is also retuning their minds. And again, I think part of what we're seeing in public right now is a result of this tuning. I think Jonathan Haidt has brought this up in his work, and looking at the hockey stick of young teenage girl suicides, well, as Jonathan Haidt pointed out, because boys are much more physical in terms of their interaction with each other. Somebody gets mad over there, some boys might do some pushing and shoving, and maybe some fists will be thrown, but there might be a bloody nose and a little bit of some bruising. But sort of the natural cycle is, at the end of it, everybody kind of, okay, we kind of let off our steam, and now we're okay. With the girls, well, you've just weaponized their their character assassination way, which is parallel to the boys throwing fists. You've just weaponized that, and you've just amplified it. And boy, wouldn't want to be a girl in this situation, because and this is all for money. It's all for money. And that's the structural aspect of it. And it's evil.
Lost our MC.
Uh-oh.
Oh, no, I'm here.
Oh, okay.
Well,
should
I
we...
was just thinking about that.
There's question time, right?
Yeah, do you want to go into question time?
Yeah, I think that's a good place. So if there's anybody who's listening who has a question about what we've been talking about, feel free to come unmuted and ask a question. Or if you just want to add something, go ahead. If not, I guess we can continue. But I think, now is probably a good time for anybody who wants to join.
If I want to go on a parallel to sort of the start of what you said, Paul, is I think Jordan Peterson has used the analogy in that sense with the attention part. He used the lecture hall as an example, and when someone starts just doing something strange in a lecture hall, you instantly pick up on it, and you're like, what the heck? Who do these people think they are, And in a sense, this...
it's...
Now it's like the attention people who started out in the rows of seats have come down to the stage, and now they have almost not abdicated, just disposed of the professor.
Yeah, and it's interesting you bring up young women, because last night I was listening to his Joe Rogan podcast with Abigail Schreier, she just wrote a book about the mass transitioning of young female women, and how she thinks that it's not truly gender dysphoria as it's been defined, but it's sort of this contagion that has, young women are very susceptible, and you're seeing these groups of friends all become trans all at the same time.
Yep.
And it's a symptom of something more than just this dysphoria, that it's become this thing to help fix their anxiety and make them feel accepted. And, social media is a huge part of that movement. And so it's hard to, I'm so glad I grew up when I did, and I'm not a young woman now, in my teens, because social media is so much more prevalent and dangerous than when I was growing up, even though I still think it's a problem for my generation. But there's just a lot that happens there that, especially for young women, is very concerning.
Well, when you look at a structural evil, people would say, well, the patriarchy. Oh, okay, the patriarchy. Well, what do we call it when Facebook? What do we call it when the Facebook corporation, which owns Instagram, does a number on teenage girls that leads to suicide, an overwhelming desire for surgery that will scotch their reproductive systems for the rest of their lives? It's rightly decried to be a heinous thing when the government sterilizes, or the Chinese government sterilizes, huge groups of women. Well, it's a far sneakier thing when Instagram does it through, contagious gender dysphoria. And, well, there is structural evil. But, we don't see gangs of, 15-year-old teenage girls tearing up Main Street over Instagram. But it's happening. But nobody will recognize it.
It's almost like a Stockholm syndrome of social media.
Yeah.
Where we're being held hostage. A lot of people are being held hostage, but they can't really get away. But now they like it,
Well, and something, what her name, Abigail, right? What she was saying is that it's not just a social media movement. It's now it's feeding into the medical system, where doctors don't want to bring up some of these issues that are happening, the trade-off to puberty blockers. And these parents who put their young kids on puberty blockers were never told the trade-offs, and they thought they were doing the right things. And, you see that. You see that with that issue, but I think you're seeing the impacts of social media and this sort of Stockholm syndrome in regular media too. Barry Weiss just wrote a resignation letter from the New Yorker, I think, and talking about, it's either the New Yorker or the New York Times. I can't remember, but basically she was saying she was resigning because she felt like she couldn't be the journalist that she was supposed to be, and she was getting in closed doors leadership telling her, "You're so brave," but wouldn't stand up for her in front of the masses of young journalists who were holding on to these social justice ideas, and essentially bullying in a way on corporate social media platforms and levels, and attacking her on Twitter. And she's like, I won't be a part of it anymore. So it just has real life impacts outside of just this world online.
Unfortunately, it's gotten even worse than that. It's gotten kind of institutional, because I just saw and shared on Twitter this horrifying story of this boy that was in a juvenile detention facility, and they forced him to have estrogen. Forced. He said, the guard said, you can't refuse this treatment. And he was afraid because he hadn't gone through one of the processes for his evaluation or whatever, and it would give him a bad mark if he started being belligerent. So he just went with it. It's changed him forever. He's got to have surgery for mammary growth, and it's messed with his brain. Father said that like he does nothing but stay in his room, and was never like that before. And it's,
if I can jump in here, I think one aspect of social media which leads to these extreme pieces is how the system is laid out in regards to once you're in a group in the social media platform, you're in that group and you don't see anything else from any other group. So let's say I'm a I watch Ben Shapiro the first time I'm on YouTube. The algorithm now is only going to feed me Ben Shapiro clips.
Yep.
I think that's a big problem with the structure that I'd like to hear your thoughts on that, Paul.
Yeah, someone who'd been on my channel, he was, he got into Christianity, a bunch of things changed about his life, and he was asking, he'd noted that in some ways, a lot of his old bad habits that he's trying to put behind him, the algorithms of these platforms keep pulling him back to places he didn't want to go. I told him, delete your account, start a new Gmail account, and start liking, you have to retrain the algorithm to go out there and find the kinds of videos that are going to direct you in the way you want to see your life go. You basically need to make the algorithm your slave instead of your master. But that's going to take some discipline on your own part in terms of what you watch. Because once you start watching this other thing, how many of us, most of you found me by the algorithm because you watched Jordan Peterson and then I popped up. And, same thing for me. And there are times when I sit and think, how much agency have I lost by my participation on social media?
Yeah, that's you can go.
No, go Andrew.
I was just going to mention that, I've noticed that change because I have two Gmails, one for my university and one for just, my personal, and the difference between the two is it's not, totally drastic, but I end up with more of you, Paul, and it's such a strange difference, though.
Yep.
I think one of the main advantages I've always done myself is I've kind of tried to be as kind of anonymous as I can on the internet, not for my own reason, I don't know who I am or anything like that, but just because then you don't get all of this tracking crap that comes along with it. And this is one of the reasons why a lot of the times when I use my web browser, I go in incognito mode or private mode a lot, because then there's no cookies that are being tracked, and then they don't follow a lot what I'm doing. And usually I also get a lot of random stuff that I don't even follow because I do that process. It's annoying because then you've got no history, you've got no things, you have to type in your passwords every single time, but it's less tracking in that regard.
At the beginning of this conversation, I brought you up, Bill.
Yeah, hello.
It's this weird situation where some of the problems that are being caused by this stuff is people continuing to remain anonymous when maybe more people need to come out and stand against some of the negative things that are happening. But on the other hand, there's a whole nother issue where a lot of these issues are coming from people going out and saying exactly what they think, and it biting them in the end. And so there's these trade-offs of both of these lifestyles, and like you have to find a way to hold these two extremes
It's
in
the
balance.
individualist problem.
If
the individualists all speak up individually, then everyone will be destroyed. The individualists would have to coordinate and then talk all at the same time.
If I want to go back to sort of the analogy of the lecture hall, it's almost like, especially with when Paul brought up the sneakiness of just social media in general, with especially Instagram. It's almost like the sneakiness, or not the lack of sneakiness from the Chinese government. They got shut down by the professor. They're like, no, leave the lecture hall. But then Instagram crept up in the back of the lecture hall and backstabbed the professor, and everyone's just in shock now. So the individualists are in shock. They're like, oh my gosh, what just happened? And it's almost like, it's the sneakiness and the backstab.
Another question I would say is, in reaction to what Cassidy just said about when you speak your mind, it always seems to hit you in the butt in this culture. And that runs counter to William Peterson's central idea that the best way to face chaos is with truth.
Mm-hmm.
It seems that in this environment, don't get the best outcome doing that. So I would ask this question: is it good to do that in regards to the outcome or receive, or is it something metaphysical that you will receive from God in age to come?
Yeah, that's where the difference between a secular and a Christian perspective takes hold, because in a secular context, you might say, okay, to speak my mind at this point, or at least to advocate an unpopular position at this point, what outcome will this get me? Well, it's probably fairly predictable. Well, this is going to get you ostracized from this community. You're going to lose status. People are going to avoid you, or they're going to actively marginalize you. If you have a perspective that includes a just judge at the end of time and some degree of restoration or reward, then suddenly you have an incentive to speak your mind here and now, even though it might cost you your life. And again, that stands at the heart of Christianity. And I think if you look at the history of Western civilization, part of the reason the West has been so successful is because we have a culture where you can break the narrative. You quite likely will suffer for it in the here and now, but the life of the age to come is leveraged in a way that creates sort of where we began with this conversation, open dialogue. Now, you might be wrong, and your idea might be bad, but a society is generally better speaking if counter-narrative arguments, and I think this is part of what the IDW is about, counter-narrative arguments can get their day out in the sunshine for people to see. Because over the long term, and again, Peterson, I thought, was good at this, most of what we think and say is wrong. How do we figure out what's wrong and what's not wrong? Well, by putting it out there and by kicking it around, kind of like a soccer ball, and figuring it out and taking a look at it. And hopefully over time, more minds are better than fewer minds. Over the long run, truth will come out because it's the most durable. So I think that's an excellent point.
All right, and we're about 5 minutes from the end of our scheduled recording. So I think it's a good time to say any last words about the subject.
I think I'm done.
KG?
Well, I don't know. It's just kind of gotten to the point where something is going to happen outside of social media that is going to put social media into more perspective. And crazier things get, more violent that action is going to seem, because what Paul said was that, anger grabs people's attention because it's a prelude to violence. And well, we see a lot of violence right now, but it's the same kind of violence we've seen before. Adams brought up that if you've been through the riots in the 60s, this is nothing new. This has happened before, and it looks the same, and it's going to blow over. Like, oh, well, in perspective of somebody who's been through that before, it's like, okay, that makes sense. But that brings the question of what's this greater anger going towards? And people are saying that there's going to be some kind of war, and that is terrifying. At the same time, folks have also been bringing up that if there is anything that unifies, it's an external threat. And so, like, I'm just hoping it doesn't have to. I'm hoping that the thing that brings us together these days isn't going to be World War III, because currently, China's being belligerent, and they're annoying U.S., the UK, and Russia. And somebody said, "Wow, that sounds like the band getting back together." It's like, well, and they happen to be encroaching in the same way as Germany and putting people in camps. It's just like, this sounds like something we've heard before. And if you look at, I brought up a couple of analogies a while back. One's called the Straight Spring. And it brings in that thing that Mark Twain said, that history doesn't repeat, it rhymes. And with people bringing up that these riots look like the 60s, like, okay, well, that means that that's going to blow over. But if you're going to bring up the same subject and saying, wow, this escalation looks like World War II, that's not good.
Yeah.
I was reading this morning. I'm going through one of these great courses on the history of religion in America, and in the 1850s there was rioting in New York City, anti-Catholic rioting, because it was very interesting reading all the Protestant propaganda against the Catholics. And, churches, Roman Catholic churches were burned, Roman Catholic schools were burned, people were killed. Then some Catholics decided to take up arms to try to protect their churches. And then the mayor of Philadelphia, that had a larger Catholic population, basically wrote the mayor of New York and said, if Catholics keep getting killed in your city, we're going to have an army of Catholics from Philadelphia come to New York City and tear up your town. And now, today we would think, gosh, what if the, I'm trying to think, what if the mayor of, I'm trying to think of a blue and a red city that are close enough to, what if the mayor of Baltimore said to the mayor of Camden, if you don't get your act together, we're gonna send our gangbangers over and, tear up Camden even worse. It's just crazy. There was when you look at the massacre of Mormons in Missouri, it was the Missouri militia that massacred the Mormons, and the militias were kind of these state armies because the states were much more states rather than these things we have today. So, but your point, Kevin, is exactly right. These tipping points sometimes become, here's a flare up and then they subside, but every now and then the flare up just keeps taking momentum, as in Nazi Germany, and occupies the whole nation and just levels up on an international basis. And let's pray that doesn't happen. So, but at the same time, the kinds of conflicts we're seeing are regular, and they come over religion, they come over race, they come over economic class. The beginning of the French Revolution, hungry women stormed Versailles. This was a riot of women. And so this is, we're human beings. This is what we do. And the problem is social media continues to monkey with our sense-making structures. So.
All right.
Shall I end the recording?
I think so.
Okay, and then
real quick. I wanted to ask Paul something that was asked on the questions, as a kind of a lighthearted outro. You're sitting around a fire with George MacDonald, Leo Tolstoy, and Abraham Lincoln. You are charged with the responsibility of sparking a conversation that will be live streamed. Don't ask how. The world to see and hear. Conversation is centered around 3 questions. What questions would you ask, or why?
Oh gosh, I can't answer that off the top of my head. Partly because, well, I don't know enough about MacDonald, really. I read Tolstoy's Confession and really enjoyed the book. Lincoln, such an interesting, brilliant, fascinating man. I've read multiple biographies of Lincoln. I would focus on Lincoln just because I'm more interested in Lincoln than I am the other two. And
what question would you ask him?
I don't know. I would probably ask him about his wife, about what it was like to, how on earth did he manage to continue to lead the country during the midst of a civil war while his wife was going mad and he lost a son. I mean, you look at what that man did with what he faced in his private life. It's truly amazing. And then you get to, the second inaugural or the Gettysburg Address. These tiny little speeches that are just phenomenally brilliant. And this out of a guy who, sort of comes out of nowhere in some ways. I mean, Lincoln, man, what a figure in American history. and then to have him assassinated. I mean, because if you thought, in some ways, a war is easy to prosecute, kill the enemy. The real challenge was Reconstruction. And so to have the course of American history with respect to race and so many other things would have been dramatically different if the United States had had a president, continued to have a president like Lincoln instead of Andrew Johnson, who, you know, it's just a phenomenal story. The story of the American Civil War, of Abraham Lincoln, and then, you know, Andrew Johnson, and then Ulysses S. Grant. You know, again, we have anxiety about our current age. We have nuclear weapons. We have, you know, a pandemic. Fair enough. Things are scary. But to me, the gaping hole in the imagined representation of the IDW is the lack of historians, because good grief, look at what the nation and human beings have survived in the past. It ain't pretty, but what we're dealing with now, I mean, even compared to life in the third world, you know, the lights are on, cops don't pull you over to shake you down. Even the numbers of Americans killed by police now, as compared to what they were in the 1970s. You know, I have my criticisms of Steven Pinker, but he's got a point. And life for many of us is secure, affluent, comfortable. The opportunities we have are, compared to the vast majority of human beings throughout human history, the opportunities we have are amazing. We are whiny and pathetic compared to so many other human beings. So I don't know what to do with Lincoln, Tolstoy, and George MacDonald. What a trio. Only this Discord server could come up with that trio. Maybe that's a good way to end. Sound good?
It sounds good to me.
All right, I'll stop recording and we can do some debriefing.